The yellow light above the lobby flickered, humming like it always did at this hour midnight. The hotel was silent, save for the soft swish of a mop gliding across the marble tiles. Ray's back curved slightly as he worked, shoulders moving in a slow, familiar rhythm. His janitor's cart rested nearby, neatly arranged, almost like a soldier's gear. Every rag folded, every bottle labeled Dot in his worn-out shoes. Ray moved like a man used to being invisible. Guests came and went, without ever looking down, but he didn't mind. This was his world now, quiet, predictable, clean. Across the hallway, the glass walls reflected his image back at him, salt and pepper hair, sunken eyes, a name tag that had long lost its shine. He paused to stretch his back, wiping sweat from his brow with the edge of his sleeve. Then he took a slow breath, leaned on the mop, and looked upward. Somewhere on the upper floors, a door closed softly. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening not just to the silence but to the thoughts he never said aloud. Mia Eisted, the silence answered like it always did. He went back to work, pushing the mop down the corridor like it was part of him. The scent of lemon cleaner lingered in the air. It wasn't elevator music or a phone ringtone. It was live piano chords, delicate and regal. Echoing from the grand ballroom around the corner, Ray turned toward the sound, curious but cautious. And as he stepped quietly toward it, the mop trailing behind, he heard something else, laughter, applause, and a bridal march beginning to play. He froze. Not because it was beautiful, but because something in it stirred a ghost. Ray edged closer to the ballroom, careful not to let his shoes squeak against the polished floor. He stopped just at the edge of the doorway, half hidden behind a marble pillar, and watched golden chandeliers poured light like melted honey over the room. Dozens of floral arrangements spiraled around ivory tablecloths, crystal glasses glittering beneath the glow. Waiters adjusted cutlery with white-gloved hands. Photographers buzzed quietly around a young couple rehearsing beneath a floral arch, and there, standing in the center of it, all was the bride. She wasn't dressed yet, but even in her pale blue rehearsal dress, she owned the room like a queen. Her back was straight, her smile poised, and her laugh soft but commanding. Ray swallowed. He hadn't seen a wedding since his daughter used to dream of one. He didn't belong here. He knew that. Still, something rooted him to the spot. The bride turned suddenly, her veil trailing from a hanger nearby. She practiced lifting it with slow grace, holding her hands just as the pianist replayed the melody from earlier. She tilted her head toward the piano. "Slower," she said, her voice feather-light. "My feet remember differently." Ray blinked. That voice. There was something inside it, like a memory being untied. He leaned in, ever so slightly. His hand gripped the mop handle. She turned again, laughing this time, and as she stepped back from the piano, something in her profile caught the light. Something familiar. The pianist nodded, just like old times. She smiled. Almost, Ray didn't breathe. He'd heard that voice before years ago, in a different place, a darker place. She moved with elegance now, but once, long ago. That voice had trembled in a storm outside a school. His fingers clenched, because suddenly, the music wasn't the only thing haunting the hall. The rehearsal paused as the groom checked his phone, distracted. The room shifted into quiet chatter, a brief lull in the music. The bride stepped away from the piano and wandered toward the exit, trailing her fingers along the edge of a linen-draped table. But she stopped, right at the threshold of the room. Her eyes scanned the hallway slowly, like she'd felt something, a presence, a memory, and then, almost too softly to be sure, she whispered a name, Mr. Ray. His spine straightened. It wasn't loud, but it struck like lightning. No one else in the room seemed to hear her. The chatter continued. The pianist laughed softly with a staff member. But Ray, he didn't move. He couldn't. She took one more step toward the door. Her brows knitted just slightly. Her lips parted like a question was forming, but never asked. Then someone called her name, her real name. This time, and she turned away. Distracted, Ray leaned against the wall, mop still in his hands. Breath caught in his throat. Mr. Ray. Nobody called him that anymore. Not here. Not since he left teaching. Not since Mia. That name belonged to a version of himself he'd buried, like an old jacket folded in the back of a closet. Worn, forgotten, too painful to wear again. He peeked around the edge of the pillar once more. She was gone now, swallowed by the ballroom. Her laughter again mixing with the piano's gentle hum. But that name, that voice, ... it stirred something that hadn't moved in years. And now he couldn't stop wondering, and why did she say it like he'd once saved her life? The hallway grew colder, or maybe it was just his memory slipping through a crack in time. Ray backed away from the ballroom entrance and found himself drifting down a corridor, past the staff elevator, into a quiet storage room with a folding chair and a water cooler. He sat down, elbows on knees, mop abandoned beside him, his eyes closed, and the past spilled in like floodwater. It was a rainy afternoon years ago, the kind where the clouds sat low like grief. He'd just finished sweeping the modest steps of the old community school where he taught music to whoever still believed in it. That's when he heard Eth knocks, small, hesitant. He opened the classroom door and found a girl, soaked to the skin, torn jacket, dirty cheeks, a plastic bag clutched in her tiny hands. No name, just eyes that refused to cry. She didn't ask for food or money. Is it okay if I just listen? She'd whispered, so he let her sit curled on the floor behind the piano. As his class stumbled through scales, day after day, she returned. Never spoke much, just listened, sometimes hummed. Eventually, he asked her name. Eli, she'd said, voice barely audible, short for Eliana. His breath caught Eliana. The bride. His fingers pressed against his lips as the memory ended like a song with no final note. It couldn't be. It shouldn't be, but it was. The girl in rags was now the woman in white. He leaned back, stunned. The student he once sheltered in silence was the bride rehearsing down the hall, and she'd just spoken the name he thought he'd buried forever. The air in the storage room felt heavier now. Ray sat still, shoulders hunched, like if he moved too fast, the memory would vanish. But it didn't. Ileana's name clung to him like the scent of chalk from the old classroom. Walls. His hand reached into his shirt pocket with a tremble. Couldn't hide. He pulled out a worn leather wallet creases like tired skin, edges frayed from too many years in the same jacket. Inside, tucked behind old receipts and a bus pass, was a photo. A little girl with curly hair and missing teeth grinned from behind glass, her eyes wide. Her hands wrapped around a tiny violin like it was treasure. Ray held the picture like it was made of glass. He always carried it, every shift, every day. His ritual, his anchor. She would have been 23, he whispered to the quiet room. His thumb traced the photo's edge. She loved to play in parks more than practice in rooms. She used to say the trees clapped louder than any audience. He exhaled, slowly, eyes moist but steady. You'd be her age now, he murmured to no one. If the word hung there, unfinished, heavy, if time hadn't been so cruel, if sickness hadn't come early, if second chances grew on trees. The photo shook slightly in his hands. He looked again at Mia's smile, then blinked hard because for 1 second, just one, he saw Ileana's face in hers. That same spark, that same sadness tucked beneath courage. He tucked the photo away carefully, gently, like it could still hear him. Then he stood, slower this time. He wasn't sure if he was walking toward the ballroom or toward a ghost that suddenly had a name again. Ray returned to the lobby, mop in hand but mind far away. The music had stopped. The lights dimmed a little, shifting from rehearsal brightness to the soft, warm glow reserved for cocktail hours and quiet goodbyes. He kept his head low, planning to finish the marble path near the entrance, to disappear again into the rhythm he knew best, but the quiet broke. You don't remember me, do you? He stopped mid-step. That voice again. He turned slowly. She was standing just behind him, veil in her hand, dress trailing softly along the floor. No entourage, no photographer. Just her? Her eyes searched his face, not for confirmation, but for courage. Ray's lips parted, but no words came. Her expression wasn't angry. It wasn't even sad. It was something more dangerous knowing. I wasn't sure until just now, she said, stepping closer. But the way you held that mop, the way you looked at the music, he blinked. I used to hide in your classroom, she continued, a shaky smile playing at her lips. You let me sit by the radiator. I never said much. Ray finally breathed. She nodded once. Eli back then? Her voice cracked barely, but her eyes didn't. I've thought about you, she said, softer now. More times than you'd believe. His hand gripped the mop like it was a shield. "I didn't recognize you," he whispered. "You've changed." "So have you," she said, her voice warm but heavier now, but not where it counts. They stood there, the janitor and the bride, separated by time and silk and sorrow, and the years fell away. And just like that, he remembered everything. The lobby faded around them. For a moment, it was just the hum of memory-old tile, cold nights, and the quiet kind of kindness that didn't need witnesses. Ray looked away, trying to steady the emotion tightening his chest. "I never thought I'd see you again," he said, voice low. "You disappeared." Ileana smiled gently. "You helped me disappear." She stepped closer. The veil still draped over her arm like a secret not yet worn. "I was living at the shelter near 5th, she said. "My mother was gone. My father. Wasn't someone I could return to, but your classroom. That was the first place I felt safe." Ray's hands trembled slightly. "You were just a kid. You were the first adult who didn't ask questions I couldn't answer." She paused, her voice thinning. "One night, after a storm, I came to class early. You were cleaning up the rainwater that leaked through the ceiling. I was shivering. And you gave me your coat. You said nothing, just left it folded on the piano bench." Ray swallowed, the image flashing back her thin frame, soaked shoes. Hollow eyes. "I wanted to say thank you," she said, blinking fast now. "But the next week, I was placed in a foster home far away. I never got the chance." She reached into her clutch and pulled out a wrinkled paper. Carefully folded, Ray unfolded it. A drawing childlike, colorful. Clumsy him, a man with a mop and a music note. "You gave me this place when I had none," she whispered. "I kept it all these years." He looked at the picture at her, then back again, and for the first time in years, he felt seen. Ray stood still, clutching the drawing like it was made of glass. His fingers ran across the faded crayon lines, the crooked smile, the oversized mop. The red heart floating above the stick figure's head. Ileana watched him quietly, her eyes soft but unreadable. "I used to imagine," she said, "that you were my real dad." Ray's throat tightened. He looked at her draped in elegance, hair pinned like a magazine bride, standing in the very hotel where he cleaned toilets and scrubbed grout. He said nothing, because anything he might have said would have broken something. She continued, gently. But life had different plans. At that moment, the ballroom doors opened. A tall man in a crisp tuxedo stepped out gray at the temples, gold cufflinks flashing under the light. "Her adoptive father, Eliana," he called out, smiling like a man used to applause. "They're asking for you inside." She turned slightly. "I'll be there in a second." He looked at Ray, barely offering a nod, eyes brushing over him like lint. Then he vanished back through the golden doors. Ray watched them close, then looked back at her. "He seems proud," he said. With an ache tucked beneath his words, "He paid for the flowers," she replied softly, "but he never saw the roots." Ray gave a sad smile, the kind only a father who'd lost could offer. "She must have been wonderful," Ileana whispered suddenly. He nodded. Ileana stepped forward and, without asking, placed a hand on his chest right, where the photo of Mia rested. Tucked inside, "I wouldn't be here if you hadn't cared when no one else did." Then, with one last glance, she turned and walked toward the man who would walk her down the aisle. Ray stood frozen, watching someone else's daughter walk away. Ray returned to his cart, but something in him had shifted. The mop felt heavier now not from weight, but from memory. Every pass across the marble whispered with echoes of what might have been. He moved quietly, avoiding the ballroom, focusing on the long corridor near the elevators. The music inside had begun again, faster now, celebratory. Laughter rose like champagne bubbles, light and unreachable. As he rounded the corner near the staff lounge, he heard hurried footsteps. "Excuse me," said a sharp voice behind him. He turned to find the hotel's event coordinator clipboard in hand. Headset tilted around her neck. Her tone was polite, but practiced. "Management has requested that all custodial staff avoid the main lobby for the next few hours," she said briskly. "Guests are beginning to arrive for the ceremony rehearsal. We need everything flawless." Ray nodded silently. She didn't wait for a response. "You can finish the back hallways and lower floors. Maintenance will handle the ballroom." Ray opened his mouth, but no words came. He simply nodded again and turned. He'd been pushed to the edges before. He was used to the sidelines, but tonight, it felt like more than just a job. As he moved toward the service elevator, something caught his eye near a velvet bench outside the coat room, a piece of paper. Folded, then torn, he bent to pick it up. It was part of a wedding invitation. Her name still visible in gold leaf, Ileana Grace Whitmerand, scribbled across the bottom in pen, small and slanted. For him, if he still walks these halls. Ray stared at it. She left this for him. He slipped it into his pocket, heart pounding louder than the music still playing down the hall. The service elevator groaned as it carried Ray down to the second floor, one level above the basement, one below the lobby's gold-plated sheen. The doors opened with a reluctant sigh, and he stepped into dimmer halls, filled with echo and shadow. He walked past the numbered doors, but his feet stopped at one without needing to count. Room 208. He hadn't spoken that number aloud in years. Hadn't needed to. It wasn't on his cleaning schedule anymore. Hadn't been for ages. But it stayed in his memory like a final chord. One stormy night, years ago, a scared girl had stood soaking wet at the back door. She hadn't asked for help. She never begged. She just said, "It's cold." Ray had taken the risk, broken every rule, gave her room 208, brought her hot tea, left a blanket folded at the foot of the bed, sat on the floor outside the door all night. Just in case she needed him, she never spoke much, just whispered through the door once. "Thank you." He never told anyone, and she never came back after that night, until now. The hallway light flickered. He touched the doorknob like it was sacred dot behind him. The elevator dinged again. The front desk clerk stepped out, holding a white envelope. He looked confused, searching. Ray cleared his throat. The young man held out the envelope. "This note. She asked me to deliver it. Said if anyone by this name still worked here, it was for him." Ray took it with slow hands. The handwriting was delicate. One line only. "Do you still remember the room with no questions?" His fingers closed around the paper. He smiled. Ray returned to the main floor. The folded note still warm in his pocket like a pulse. He didn't head to the ballroom, just passed by slowly, catching fragments of violin music and distant clapping. Ileana's laughter floated like perfume, too familiar to ignore. But someone else noticed him? "Excuse me," came a clipped voice behind him. Ray turned. A tall woman in a black pantsuit stood with her arms crossed and a headset tight to her jaw. "The wedding planner," she gave a tight smile, polite, professional, cold. "I know who you are," she began, lowering her voice. "And I'm sure this weekend stirs up emotion." Ray blinked. "I'm just doing my job." She glanced at the mop still damp in his hand. "I need you to understand something," she said, stepping closer. "This is a very exclusive event. Publicity matters. Appearances matter. The Whitmores Ileana's family are hide-here donors. And guests." Ray stayed silent. She softened her tone just enough to sound rehearsed. "People like you are important, but only when invisible." He flinched barely, but she noticed. "You were kind to her once." "I respect that," she continued, "but she's marrying into a world that doesn't leave space for nostalgia." Ray's jaw tightened. "I didn't ask for space," he said quietly. "No," she replied, adjusting her earpiece, "but sometimes silence is the greatest gift." She smiled once more, then turned and walked briskly back to the ballroom. Ray stood there, the mop handle digging into his palm. He'd been called many things in life, but never a memory to be managed. And as the doors closed behind her, he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't done remembering. Ray made his way to the laundry room, tucked deep behind the banquet hall, out of sight, out of mind. The machines hummed a dull rhythm, white sheets tumbling in endless circles. Steam kissed the ceiling and faded into nothing. He closed the door behind him. No guests, no planners, no eyes. Only silence. He leaned against the metal shelf and sank slowly to the floor, legs folding beneath him like a man finally surrendering to weight. His hands trembled as they reached for his wallet once more. Out came Mia's picture. The same smile, the same sparkle he'd seen in Ileana's eyes. He bit down on his bottom lip, holding back the welling ache. But it came anyway. Quiet tears slid down his cheeks. No sobs, no shaking. Just the quiet kind, the kind that came from places no one ever sees. "I should have saved you too," he whispered. He wasn't sure if he was talking to Mia, to God, or to the space in between, the laundry machine buzzed louder. He didn't move. 20-3. She would have turned 23 tonight. He used to imagine a cake, a candle, a hug that lasted a second too long. But now, all he had was this photo, and a daughter-shaped hole the world couldn't fill. The washer clicked off. Steam filled the room. He looked up, outside the fogged window. The ballroom's chandeliers flickered through the glass celebration, just on the other side of sorrow. Baby, he whispered into the steam. Barely a breath, she would have been 23 today. And the machines began another cycle, round and round and round. Like grief that never finishes spinning. It was nearly midnight when Ray wandered up to the mezzanine where the walls were quieter and the guests didn't go. The reception had ended. The ballroom stood dark below, chairs pushed back, petals scattered across the floor like forgotten promises. But from above, it looked like a stage after the final act. Ray moved to the edge of the balcony, resting his arms on the rail. He reached into the janitor cart he'd brought along, beneath rags and gloves, and slowly lifted it out. A violin scratched. Old strings slightly, rusted. He hadn't touched it in years. He sat down in the shadows of the hallway and placed it under his chin. Eyes closed, then he played. The melody was slow fragile. It trembled at first, like a newborn trying to walk. But then it steadied, became something more, something mournful, familiar. Downstairs, the night staff paused. The melody floated through vents and cracks in the ceiling like a ghost retracing its path. In the distance, footsteps. Eliana had returned to grab her boca left behind in all the rehearsal chaos. But as she stepped into the echoing ballroom, her feet stopped. The music, her breath caught. She turned, eyes following the sound upward, soft, aching notes spilled from the shadows of the mezzanine. And then her voice. Quiet, but awestruck. Where did you learn that? Ray didn't stop playing, didn't answer, because he wasn't playing for her. He was playing for a little girl who used to run barefoot through the park with a violin too big for her arms, and for a daughter who never got the chance to hear him play again. The final note faded. But Eliana's question didn. Single quotes. Ray remained still, the violin resting beneath his chin as silence returned like dusk, settling over grief. Below him, Eliana hadn't moved. Her eyes were glossy now, her bouquet forgotten. The last notes still echoed inside her. Ray slowly lowered the instrument, breath heavy, his fingers, worn and cracked from bleach and soap. Lingered on the strings. I taught someone once, he finally said, his voice hoarse. Long ago. Eliana tilted her head, stepping closer to the edge of the mezzanine's view. She must have been lucky, she whispered. Ray's gaze drifted to the far window, where moonlight spilled through in long beams. She was, he said, and so was I. He closed his eyes and suddenly, the hotel melted away. It was spring. Mia sat cross-legged in the city park, struggling to hold a violin half her size, her brow furrowed in dramatic frustration as Ray knelt beside her, gently guiding her fingers. You don't have to be perfect, he'd whispered. Just let it feel like talking. And she did. Birds in the trees, wind through grass, a father humming along under his breath. That was their concert. Back in the present, Ray smiled faintly. I used to tell her, he murmured aloud, that music was where broken things made beauty. Eliana didn't speak. She sat on the lowest stair now, listening not just to his words, but to the silence between them. Then softly, as if she already knew, she was your daughter. He nodded once, eyes never leaving the moonlight. She was my song. The ballroom was empty, but between them, something sacred had played, not just notes, but memory. The rehearsal dinner began without him. Ray stood just inside the ballroom doors, violin case tucked under his arm like contraband. The room shimmered, glasses raised, laughter layered over soft jazz, silk dresses brushing polished floors. He hesitated, then took one careful step in. Conversations dipped, not enough to stop, but enough to notice. Eliana saw him instantly. Her face softened, then tightened with something like resolve. You came, she said, crossing the room before anyone could stop her. I shouldn't, Ray replied quietly. I can go. No, she said, firm but kind. I invited you. The word invited carried weight. Heads turned. A few smiles stiffened. She guided him toward an empty seat near the back. It was too close to the wall, too far from the music, but he sat anyway, folding his hands in his lap. Champagne flutes clinked. A toast began, words about legacy, about fortune, about family. Ray listened. Invisible again. Then he felt it, the stare. Her adoptive father stood across the room, tall and immovable, his gaze fixed on Ray like an unanswered question. His jaw tightened. He said nothing, just watched. Eliana followed his line of sight. Their eyes met in midair. Something unspoken passed between them, challenge maybe, or confession. The father looked away first. Ray lowered his eyes, heart thudding. He didn't belong here. Every polished surface reminded him of it. A waiter leaned down as he passed, voice barely above a whisper. You don't belong here. Ray nodded slowly, swallowing, but Eliana didn't let go of his shoulder, and somewhere between the clinking glasses and quiet judgment, Ray realized being invited was one thing, being accepted was another. The ballroom had shifted again. The music slowed to a whisper, the waitstaff glided like shadows, and every table glittered with candles and curated conversation. Laughter came in curated bursts, all perfectly measured. Ray sat near the back, where the light barely reached. He'd removed his janitor's jacket, but still wore the weight of it in his posture. Hands folded, eyes low. The champagne glass before him remained untouched. No one spoke to him, not out of cruelty, but because silence was easier. He watched. Ileana across the room, head thrown back in laughter. Groom beside her, hand resting gently on her lower back. A perfect picture for the society pages. Still, her eyes flicked toward Ray, quick, quiet, like a tether tied beneath the table. No one noticed, except one. A waiter leaned in beside Ray. Pretending to adjust silverware? You lost, he muttered. Ray didn't respond. Or just hoping someone thinks you belong. Ray's jaw tightened. The violin case beside him brushed against his leg like a reminder of another version of himself, one that could still be heard, even if not seen. He turned away from the waiter without a word. Champagne flutes clinked again. Someone toasted to new beginnings. Ray looked around the room. The chandeliers sparkled with ambition. The laughter felt polished, practiced. But under all the glass and gold, something was missing. A heartbeat, truth. And as the applause swelled, Ray stood, quietly, unnoticed, and walked out. Because silence wasn't always polite. Sometimes, it was survival. Ray found himself alone in the staff locker room, fluorescent light buzzing overhead, paint peeling near the vents. He sat on the bench where no one ever lingered, violin case beside him. Hands resting on his knees, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. 3 times he had rewritten it, each version shorter than the last. It wasn't a speech, not really. Just thoughts, memories, words he might have said. If he'd been someone else, someone with a suit, a title, a microphone. He unfolded the paper. You don't know me, but once, long ago, your bride was a little girl hiding from the world. And I gave her a classroom, a coat, and a song. Not because I had to, but because I saw her, and she saw me back. He smiled faintly, crossed it out. The second version was braver. To the girl I once called my shadow, you made it, and you've carried more grace in your silence than most do with their crowns. Ray blinked hard. The third version was only 1 sentence. You reminded me what it felt like to be a father. His hands trembled. He looked at the words. Then slowly, he reached for the small trash bin tucked beside the lockers. With steady fingers, he tore the pages into strips and let them fall like feathers, ashes without fire. He sat in silence, but when he stepped back into the hallway, Ileana stood there, her eyes on his fingers. The torn paper still clung to his palm. Her gaze softened. Did you write something? Ray met her eyes. I couldn't find the right words. She smiled gently. You already gave them to me. The music started again, soft, slow, the kind meant for memory, not celebration. Ray stood just outside the ballroom, hands behind his back, watching through the sliver between 2 grand doors. The room inside was dim now, bathed in gold and shadows. The final rehearsal was ending. Guests had paired off. Some danced. Others watched, sipping champagne like it was made of compliments. And at the center of it all, Ileana and her adoptive father. They moved slowly, gracefully, her hand on his shoulder, his palm pressed against the small of her back. It was choreographed to perfection like a memory someone else had scripted. But Ray saw it, the stiffness in her smile, the way her eyes never rose above his collarbone, the slight sway, just off rhythm because the music playing wasn't theirs. Ray stayed behind the door, unseen. His breath caught in his chest as if his lungs had learned how to mourn without sound. It wasn't envy. It was something quieter. Regret, not for what was happening, but for what would never happen again. He remembered Mia spinning in the kitchen, in socks, arms outstretched. "You have to lead," she used to giggle he had, until life took the music away. Inside the ballroom, the dance ended. Applause, polite, hollow. Ileana stepped back, curtsied slightly, then turned away before the crowd could swallow her again. She slipped through the side exit and into the corridor where Ray stood frozen in half-dash step. She met his eyes. No words, just two people standing in a hallway of too many. Goodbyes, then without a sound, she walked toward him. Alone, not for the crowd, not for the cameras, just for him. They stood face to face under the hallway's flickering sconce light. Far from the chandeliers, far from the noise, Ray looked down, unsure if he should speak. Unsure if this moment was real or borrowed. Ileana stepped closer, voice barely above a whisper. "I've danced with 1,000 strangers," she said, "but never with the one who gave me my first home." Ray's breath caught. His hands, instinctively, reached for the violin case hanging by his side. "Not right now," he nodded slowly. The silence between them wasn't empty. It pulsed with shared memories, unnamed grief, and unspoken healing. "When I was a girl," she said, voice trembling, "I used to hide under your desk during storms. You'd pretend not to notice, but you always left a granola bar where I could find it." Ray smiled faintly, eyes glassy. "You always left the wrapper neatly folded." "That was my thank you," she said, eyes never leaving his. "You didn't ask me why I was there. You didn't try to fix me. You just stayed," her hands folded in front of her, fingers fidgeting with her bracelet. "You were my first safe place, Mr. Ray." He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came. So instead, he stepped forward, unsure, and held out his hand, a half gesture, an invitation. She placed her hand in his without hesitation. And in that quiet hotel hallway, with no audience, no spotlight, and no music, they swayed just once, just enough to remember what safety used to feel like. "You saved me," she whispered. He closed his eyes. "I never forgot you." The soft sway ended. But Ileana didn't let go of his hand. She looked up into Ray's eyes, searching for something, an answer, maybe, or permission to ask the question that had been sitting in her chest for years. "Why were you always so kind to me?" she asked quietly. "I was a stranger." Ray looked down at their joined hands. His voice came slow, thick, like molasses. "You reminded me of someone." Ileana waited. He let go of her hand and stepped back, reaching into the inner pocket of his worn jacket. With a quiet sigh, he pulled out the folded photo of Mia. He handed it to her gently, like it was glass. She unfolded it, a little girl in a sunflower dress, holding a violin too big for her arms, a missing tooth, a smile made of sunlight. "She died when she was 9, Ray said softly. "Leukemia." Ileana's fingers trembled as she held the photo. "I saved you," he continued, voice cracking, "but I couldn't save her." His eyes welled, and for once, he didn't blink the tears back. "I've carried that every day," he said, almost to himself. "Like maybe saving you meant something, balanced something." Ileana looked up from the photo, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "It did," she said. "You didn't just save me. You made me believe I could be more than where I came from." Ray turned to the window, where moonlight brushed across the floor. "I talk to her sometimes," he whispered. "Ask if she's proud." Ileana stepped beside him. She would be. They stood together in the stillness. One man grieving a daughter he lost. One woman honoring the father she found. The bridal suite was quiet, wrapped in golden lamplight and the scent of white roses wilting in crystal vases. Fabric draped across velvet chairs, makeup brushes scattered across a mirrored table. Outside, the city slept. Inside, Ileana stood in front of the floor-length mirror. The dress hung from her shoulders like a whispered delicate lace. Soft tulle, a train that pooled like silk rain behind her, but the back zipper remained untouched. She stared at herself, at the woman she'd become. Then she looked over her shoulder. "Would you help me?" she asked. Ray stood by the door, uncertain. She offered a faint smile. "Just the zipper," she said gently. "That's all." He walked toward her slowly, hands trembling not from age but from reverence, from the weight of a moment he never imagined having. His fingers grazed the lace near her spine. "I've never done this before," he said softly. She smiled. "Neither have I." He pinched the zipper between two calloused fingers, gently sliding it upward. The sound was soft, barely there, but it echoed like a lullaby from a long-forgotten past. With every inch he closed, he saw her transform not just into a bride, but into someone whole. When he reached the top, he paused. His reflection met hers in the mirror. And for a fleeting second, they looked like father and daughter preparing for the most important day of her life. A tear slid down Ray's cheek before he could stop it. It fell and landed on the lace. Ileana turned, eyes glassy but steady. She reached up and wiped his cheek, her fingers gentle. "You don't need to say anything," she whispered. And in the stillness of that dressing room, full of silence and lace and love never spoken, they both knew words would have only broken it. The ballroom had changed. Gone were the laughter and chatter. In their place, a hush reverent, golden, breathless. Guests sat in rows beneath chandeliers, now dimmed to a warm glow. Petals lined the aisle in two perfect curves. Like an open path through memory, the pianist rested his hands in his lap. Everyone waited at the back of the room. The double doors opened, gasps, whispers. Ileana stood in the archwindow, bridesmaids flanking her. No father at her side, just her. And beside her, holding a worn violin, Ray. He looked nothing like the others in their tailored suits. No polished shoes. No gleaming cufflinks, just a pressed shirt and the weight of 1,000 nights in silence. The room changed. The first note floated like air, fragile, familiar. Aching, it was the lullaby. The one Mia used to hum in the park. The one Ileana once heard through a cracked school window. Each note carried a piece of something lost. And Ileana walked forward, slow and steady, not with fanfare, but with grace. The guests didn't know how to react. Some turned to each other, confused. Her adoptive father remained seated, still as a statue. The groom stood at the altar, hands stiff, expression unreadable. But Ileana's eyes never left Ray's. With each step, the past grew smaller behind her, and the music, louder within her. She reached the altar just as the final note rang out, a single, sustained breaths that filled every corner of the room. Then silence. Ray lowered the violin, kissed his cheek, and whispered, "Thank you for walking me home." The crowd didn't applaud, but in that silence, something sacred stood. The violin had barely finished singing when the ceremony resumed, but something invisible had shifted. Ileana stood beside her groom now, hands gently folded, eyes soft but far away. The officiant began to speak, words rolling like water over polished stone. But Ray didn't sit. He stepped to the side, away from the aisle, folding quietly into the shadows near the back. From there, he watched. The groom reached for Ileana's hands. She gave them, but slowly. "You okay?" he whispered. She smiled politely. "I'm here." He glanced over her shoulder, past the crowd, toward the man who had just played her down the aisle. "That was unusual," he said, forcing a chuckle. "It meant something to me," she replied. Without blinking, he studied her face, unsure how to respond. "You didn't tell me he'd be part of this," he said, voice low but sharp. "I didn't know he would be," she replied. "But when the moment came, I chose what mattered." The groom swallowed. His grip on her hand loosened slightly. "I thought your father was doing the walk." Ileana tilted her head. He didn't know how. A long silence stretched between them. Ray watched from afar, heart steady, now not proud, not bitter, just still at the altar. The groom looked down, and in that pause, thick with truth and discomfort, he said, "He means more to you than I ever tried to." Ileana didn't answer. She didn't have to, because the crowd was still. The vows waited, and in the quiet between question and commitment, a deeper truth had already been spoken. The ceremony ended in soft applause. Not loud, not raucous, just enough to echo through the chandeliers and slip into the cracks between conversations. Ileana smiled through it, hugged guests, posed for photos. But her eyes searched for only one person. Ray had retreated to the corner near the reception tables, where the shadows were thicker and no cameras turned. He was about to slip out quietly, as he always did, until she stopped him. "Eliana," someone called. "You missed a photo with the groomsmen." "In a second," she replied, her eyes never leaving Ray. She approached him slowly. Bouquet now replaced with something wrapped in cloth thin, familiar. Old, he raised an eyebrow as she held it out. He unwrapped it with careful fingers. It was the violin, his violin, the one he pawned over a decade ago to pay for Mia's hospital bill. He hadn't seen it since. "The pawn shop downtown," Ileana said, her voice warm but trembling. "It was there for years. I recognized the initials scratched inside the case." She opened it gently to reveal the carving near the neck. R.D. Ray blinked hard. "You kept it." "I bought it when I turned 18, she said. "Every note I ever played on another violin never sounded quite right. I always wanted to give this back to the man who made music feel like safety." Ray couldn't speak. His hand trembled as it traced the body of the instrument, familiar curves, worn strings. "A chipped bridge Mia had once sanded herself. It's yours," she whispered. "Always was." And as he cradled the violin again, he realized she hadn't just returned an instrument, she'd returned a piece of himself. The ballroom swelled with music and congratulations. The first dance began, and guests surrounded the floor like waves around an island. Laughter, clinking glasses, flashes of camera lights all played their part in the pageantry. But Eliana stood at the edge of it all, motionless. The groom held out his hand. She hesitated just for a second, but long enough for the room to notice. She placed her hand in his, but her smile didn't follow. They moved together in rhythm, the photographer circling like a moth to the light. The crowd watched, applauded, but Ray, watching from the shadows, saw something no one else did. Her fingers were tense. Her gaze wandered past the chandelier, past the crowd, past the man spinning her in slow circles. Then, the music paused for a mid-song transition. She stepped back, took one breath, and ran. Gasps filled the air as her heels clicked rapidly across the floor, where past startled guests. The groom called out, "Ileana?" She didn't turn. Ray stood frozen, violin in hand. She brushed past him in the hallway, dress lifted slightly in one hand, eyes burning not with tears, but with clarity. "This wedding isn't me," she whispered as she passed, and she was gone. Doors slammed. The music faltered. Voices rose in panic. The groom stood at the altar alone, face pale, fists clenched. Someone turned to Ray. "Where is she going?" Ray didn't answer, because he didn't know. But in the quiet left behind, one thing rang louder than any vow. She hadn't run from fear. She'd run towards something finally real. The ballroom dissolved into murmurs and motion. Guests whispered behind hands. Staff moved swiftly to close doors. Hushed confusion. The groom stood at the altar like a statue, slowly cracking. The wedding planner's heels clacked down the hallway. Headset blinking red. "Find her," she snapped to a staff member. "Lock the service exits. Check the bridal suite." She couldn't have gone far. Ray stepped backward into the shadows, nearly unnoticed. Nearly. The planner caught sight of him. "You," she said, storming toward him. "Where is she?" Ray blinked. "I don't know. You were speaking with her before she disappeared." "She walked past me," he said calmly. Her voice dropped an octave. "She's frightened." "You knew her when she was a child, didn't you? That kind of bond is powerful." "And dangerous," Ray's brow furrowed. "Dangerous. She's about to marry into a legacy, a future. And you," she gestured, toward his worn shirt, his violin case. "Your nostalgia, disruption." Ray stared at her. He asked softly. She tilted her head. "Isn't it always?" A silence grew between them. Then the groom approached, shoulders stiff, jaw set. "Where did she go?" he asked. Ray didn't flinch. "She didn't tell me." The groom's eyes narrowed. "She trusts you." Ray met his gaze. "That's not something to be angry about. It's something to earn." Behind them, the ballroom buzzed like a hive cracked open. But Ray turned, stepped away from the commotion, and walked toward the quiet end of the corridor. No panic in his steps, because somehow he knew exactly where she was going. The city shimmered in the distant soft, silent, unaware. Ray stepped through the rear exit of the hotel, the cold air hitting him like a breath held too long. The night had fallen deep and quiet, broken only by the hush of the nearby river. It wasn't far, a short walk down the stone path past the garden. Beneath a weeping willow older than the hotel itself, the branches swayed like they remembered things. And then the edge of the river, bank stood Ileana. Her heels were off, dress gathered in her arms. Hair undone by wind, not stylist. She didn't turn when Ray approached. Just spoke softly, eyes fixed on the black water that whispered against the rocks. "This is where I used to come. Back when the shelter got too loud," she said. "Back when I had nowhere to think." Ray stood beside her, hands in his coat pockets. "You remembered, I never forgot." A pause. "Everyone in there wants me to be something." "You already are," she smiled faintly, eyes glossy but dry. "I wanted the dress, the flowers. I even thought I wanted the groom," she said. "But when I walked down that aisle," her voice cracked, "I realized I only wanted to feel known." Ray's jaw tensed, but his shoulders relaxed. She stepped closer to him. "I didn't know where else to go," she admitted. Ray looked out at the water, his voice low. "This was always your place." She nodded. "I just wanted to hear the river again. It's the only thing that never lies." They stood there in silence, not escaping, not hiding, just two souls. Listening to something honest for the first time all night, the moonlight spilled across the riverbank like a silent blessing. The wind pulled gently at Eliana's dress, and the water rippled with every quiet breath. The night dared to take. Ray sat down on the old wooden bench by the edge, the one with peeling paint and initials carved by children. Eliana joined him, folding her legs beneath the layers of tulle, barefoot. Grounded, they didn't speak for a while, and then "I used to dream of this," she said softly. Ray glanced at her. "Not the wedding," she added. "Not the ballroom, just sitting somewhere like this, with someone who knew me, really knew me." She reached into the folds of her gown and pulled out a delicate gold chain, a locket. She opened it inside two photos, one her as a child, outside the school with chalk on her hands, the other Mia, smiling with a violin under her chin. "I kept her photo," Ileana said, "even when I didn't know her name." Ray swallowed hard. "I don't have the right to be your father," he whispered. She looked at him gently. "You already were." Ray's eyes filled. He looked down at his worn hands. "You taught me more than anyone else ever tried to," she continued. "You gave me music, space, kindness. You gave me you." Ray turned toward her, heart full, voice unsteady. "I never had the chance to do it right. You're doing it now," she said. Then she leaned into him, head resting on his shoulder like it had always belonged there. And for the first time, she whispered a word that filled every quiet crack in his soul. "Dad." His hands trembled. The violin rested between them like a bridge finally crossed. The next morning, the sun broke through gray clouds with hesitant light, casting long shadows across the hotel's front steps. Ray stood beneath the awning, violin case in hand, waiting for nothing in particular. Just air, just breath, just the weight of what last night had become. That's when the black town car pulled up, outstepped her. Adoptive father Mr. Whitmore, no coat, no smile, just tailored anger dressed in silk and polished leather shoes. He walked up to Ray, slow and precise, like every step had a contract behind it. "She's safe," he said, voice even. "We found her by the river." Ray nodded once. She wasn't lost. Whitmore gave a hollow smile. "You've made quite an impression. She hasn't stopped talking about you. She deserves to be heard." A pause. Then Whitmore reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Thick, heavy. "I respect what you did for her once," he said. "But this, whatever this is, can't follow her into the life she's built." He extended the envelope. "Consider this a thank you and a goodbye." Ray didn't move. "I'm not for sale," he said quietly. "Everyone's for something," Whitmore replied. Ray took the envelope slowly, held it, felt its weight, then, without a word, walked over to the nearest trash bin and dropped it in. The thunk echoed. He turned back. "Calm. She doesn't need your money," Ray said. "She needs truth. And she already has that. Whitmore stared at him, jaw tight. Ray adjusted his grip on the violin case. Some things, he added, you can't buy your way around. And then he walked away not with power, but with something rarer. Conviction. The cemetery was quiet. Wrapped in the kind of stillness that didn't ask for permission, Ray stood beneath a crooked oak tree, coat buttoned tight against the wind. Beside him, Ileana held a bouquet of wildflower sunflowers, mostly Mia's favorite. They walked together to the far corner, where the headstones were older, smaller. He led without speaking, his steps memorized. They stopped at the grave. Mia Daniels, 2001 to 2010, she heard the music in everything. The soil was soft from last week's rain. Leaves scattered across the stone like confetti, meant for quieter celebrations. Ileana knelt first. Brushing the leaves aside, her fingers traced the carved letters. She was beautiful, she said softly. She was light, Ray replied. He sat beside her, pulling the violin case gently onto his lap. I haven't brought anyone here, he said. Not even my sister. I thought keeping her to myself would make the ache smaller. Ileana laid the flowers at the base of the stone. She would have loved the music last night, she whispered. She wrote that song, Ray said, smiling faintly. She used to hum it while brushing her teeth. They sat in silence. Wind rustling the trees like an unseen orchestra tuning. Ileana reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a single white rose. She placed it at the top of the headstone, gently. Thank you, she whispered. Ray looked at her, confused. For what? For not just saving me, she said. For sharing her with me. He bowed his head, and as the wind lifted the petals gently from the flowers at their feet, it felt like Mia was there, listening, smiling, dancing, barefoot in the breeze. The sun was setting by the time Ray returned to the hotel. He didn't go to the ballroom. He didn't go to the staff entrance either. Instead, he went to the janitor's closet, his little corner of the world, where the mop leaned against the same cracked wall it always had, and the bucket still held yesterday's lemon scent. He stood there for a while, just staring. Then slowly, he unpinned his name tag from his shirt. He set it on the shelf, next to the clipboard no one ever signed. His hands moved next to his locker, careful, deliberate. From the top shelf, he pulled out a plastic grocery bag. Inside was a folded uniform shirt, the one he wore his first week. The sleeves still had the creases from how carefully he'd ironed them back then. Ray held it for a moment, then folded it once more and set it aside. He picked up his mop, ran his fingers along the wooden handle like it was an old violin bow. Then, he whispered quietly, You and me, huh? One last night, he wheeled the janitor cart out to the hallway, made one slow pass down the corridor near the ballroom. The guests were long gone. Just faint echoes and wine glasses left behind. Ileana stood at the far end of the hall. Watching. Ray gave her a soft nod. She didn't speak. He didn't either. He wheeled the cart to the utility closet, parked it, and stepped back. Then he took a long breath, turned the light off, and left his badge on the hook. One last shift, one last goodbye. He'd wake up free. But tonight was for letting go. Ray stepped out of the elevator. Unsure why she'd asked him to meet her on the top floor. He hadn't been here before. Not in all the years he'd worked this hotel. The top floor wasn't for cleaners. It was for guests with no dust on their shoes, no wrinkles in their shirts, no weight in their steps. But there she was. Ileana waited outside the suite. Barefoot again, hair pulled back in a loose knot. Her veil folded neatly over one arm. You made it, she said softly. I wasn't sure if I should. She smiled. You've earned more than doubt. She opened the door. Ray stepped inside slowly. The suite was flooded with warm light. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city glowing below for tops like stars, cars like fireflies. A bottle of ginger tea rested beside a leather chair. No champagne, no crystal, just comfort. Ileana gestured toward the chair. Sit. Ray lowered himself carefully, still uncertain. She knelt beside a small suitcase and unzipped it. I called in a favor, she said. Told the hotel manager you needed a night here. Just one. Ray blinked. I don't. It's not a gift, she interrupted. It's a mirror. You've always seen others. I wanted you to see yourself. From a better view, she walked to the window and pulled back the curtain farther. The skyline opened up like a full breath. He stood slowly, walked toward the glass. You can see the river from here, he murmured. Exactly, she whispered. They stood side by side, bathed in city light, and for once, Ray wasn't looking up from below. He was looking out, equal whole scene. The suite was quiet, filled with the hush of soft slippers on hardwood and the gentle clinking of porcelain cups. Ileana poured tea into mismatched mugs. The hotel's silver service tray left untouched beside her dot. Ray stood near the window, looking out once more, unsure if this moment was real or just some gentle hallucination. Offered by kindness, then he turned and saw her holding something, a small, white satin ribbon tied around a folded note. "What's this?" he asked. She stepped toward him, smile quiet but wide. "A ceremony," she said. "Not for marriage." Ray raised an eyebrow. "For memory." She placed the note in his hand and took his fingers in hers. "There were too many things I never got to say. Too many versions of myself that didn't survive. But tonight, I want to honor the one who did." Ray unfolded the note slowly. It wasn't long. Just a few lines written in slanted cursive. "To the man who walked me through storms without ever asking where I'd come from. To the teacher, the listener, the silent rescuer. To the father I found in the most unexpected place. Thank you for walking me down the aisle of my life." Ray blinked hard, lips parting, but no sound came. Ileana stepped back. Holding a simple silver band between her fingers, she slipped it onto his smallest knuckle knot to bind. "But to bless, you showed me what love looked like when I had nothing," she said. "You gave it back," Ray whispered. "No guests, no music, no applause, just two people, and the vow that mattered most, to always see each other and never disappear again the next morning." The sunlight poured into the suite in soft gold sheets. Ray stood at the edge of the bed, folding the hotel robe carefully. Unsure of the protocol when waking, up in a room that had only ever existed in dreams, there was a quiet knock. He opened the door to find Ileana, dressed down in jeans and a light sweater, holding a small box with a ribbon wrapped crookedly around it. "Before you go," she said, handing it to him. Ray blinked, wary of anything that felt too generous. "You've given me too much," he said softly. She smiled. Not yet. He opened the box. Inside, new shoes, not flashy, not expensive, just clean, strong, simple leather. Comfortable, built for walking. Ray looked up, confused. "I noticed yours were splitting at the heel," she said gently. "I wanted you to have a pair that didn't carry the weight of every floor you've mopped." He ran his hand along the sole, eyes soft. "They're beautiful," he murmured. "They're yours," she replied. "For wherever you go next." He sat down, removed his old shoes, slowly, the soles worn smooth, the stitching frayed. He set them beside him and slipped the new ones on. They fit perfectly. "I feel taller," he joked. She grinned. "Maybe you always were." Ray stood. Ileana looked him over, nodding. "You don't have to go back to being invisible," she said. "You've walked every hall. Now it's time to walk your own road." Ray looked down at his new shoes, and for the first time in a long, long time, he didn't feel like he was just stepping forward. He felt like he was stepping into something. Ray didn't expect to find anything when he returned home that afternoon. Just his tiny apartment, the familiar hum of the fridge, the dusty violin stand in the corner that hadn't held an instrument in years. But there it was, white envelope tucked under the door. No name, no address, just the words, handwritten in ink that looked like it had been written slowly. For the man who stayed. Ray opened it with steady fingers, his breath catching before he even read the first line. Inside a letter, long folded neatly and smelling faintly of rose and rain. "Dear Mr. Ray, I don't know what your real title is anymore. Janitor, teacher, musician, father to me. You've been all of them. There were nights I almost forgot who I was. But I never forgot your quiet, your warmth, your safety. You gave me your silence when the world was too loud. You gave me music when my life had no rhythm, when no one else saw me. You did that saved me more than you know. I thought weddings were about beginnings. But last night, I realized something deeper. They're also about recognition. And I recognized you, not as a man who cleaned floors, but as the one who lifted me off them. Thank you for never asking to be honored, and thank you for letting me do it anyway. Love always." Ileana. Ray folded the letter, eyes stinging. He held it to his chest, not like paper, but like proof dot, and as the light poured through the window, He wept quietly, not from grief, but from the miracle of being remembered. Weeks passed. Spring came in quietly, petals on sidewalks, wind in open windows, the city trading its gray for green. Ray hadn't touched a mop since the wedding. His hands were busy with something else. He stood before a narrow building tucked between a bakery and an old tailor's shop. The sign above the door had just been hung, the paint still drying. Mia and Eliana Violin School, a place for forgotten daughters. His eyes lingered on the lettering, graceful, gold on white. Inside, the walls had been freshly painted. A mural of tree branches wound across one side, each limb holding a note, a ribbon, a name. Mia's photo hung near the front desk. Eliana's favorite bow was framed beneath it. Ray stepped through the door, taking it in. 4 chairs, 3 music stands, 1 piano, and shelves lined with donated instruments sold. New, cracked, beautiful. He walked to the center of the room, ran his fingers across the polished wood of the teacher's desk. His desk now. Behind him, the door opened. Eliana entered, holding a box of sheet music and a smile made of quiet pride. "We already have 3 sign-ups," she said. "All from the shelter." Ray nodded, heart full. She set the box down and joined him at the front. "I didn't build this for me," she whispered. "I know," he replied. "You built it for the girl you used to be." She looked around, for the ones still out there, waiting to be seen. Ray nodded slowly, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't teaching for a paycheck. He was teaching for legacy, for healing, for memory that would never be silenced again. It was the 3rd week of lessons. When the door creaked open, an familiar shadow stepped into the violin school. Ray looked up from tuning a student's bow. Mr. Whitmore, Ely, adoptive father, stood in the doorway like someone who didn't expect to be noticed. He wore a navy coat over his pressed suit, his face unreadable. His hands behind his back. Eliana saw him too. She stepped out from one of the practice rooms, wiping chalk from her hands. "Dad," she said quietly, no warmth, no malice. Whitmore offered a stiff nod. "I was nearby," he said. "Heard about the school?" Ray stood still. He didn't speak. Whitmore glanced around, at the mismatched chairs, the mural, the photos on the wall. "You've made something," he said. It wasn't praise. It wasn't criticism, just fact. Eliana nodded. "Yes, we have." He cleared his throat. "You could have had more prestige, opportunity, influence." She smiled, small but steady. "I chose meaning." He looked at her for a long moment, something fragile flickering behind his stern eyes. And then he did something no one expected. He stepped forward, placed a sealed envelope on the desk, and turned to Ray. "I won't interfere again," he said. Then to Eliana, quietly, "I hope you find what I never gave you." She didn't answer. He nodded once and walked out. No fight, no plea, just a quiet exit from a story that no longer needed him. Ray exhaled slowly. Eliana turned to him. "He never understood who I was," she said. Ray nodded. "Watching the door, but you did, and that was all that mattered now." The story broke on a Sunday. Ray was pouring tea behind the reception counter of the violin school when Eliana burst through the door, newspaper in hand, her smile brighter than the morning light. "Page 5, she said, waving the paper. "You're not going to believe this." Ray took it carefully. Wiping his fingers first, the headline read, "The janitor who walked a bride down the aisle and built a school for girls like her" below it. A photo, black and white, soft edges of Ray, standing in the new classroom, violin in hand, Eliana by his side, both looking at the mural behind them. He stared at it in disbelief. "They called me last week," Eliana explained, said someone from the wedding had tipped them off. A story like this, it needed to be heard. Ray's voice was quiet. "I didn't do it to be seen." "I know," she said, smiling. "That's why it matters." He scanned the article quotes from Eliana about second chances, about safety, about the power of kindness from unexpected places. A mention of Mia, a paragraph about Ray's years of silent work, not as a janitor, but as a steady presence in the lives of others. "They're calling it a human story," Eliana said. Ray set the paper down. Emotion caught in his throat. "It's more than that," he said softly. "It's hers, yours, ours." He folded the page carefully, tucked it inside a drawer behind the counter like something sacred. For the first time in his life, someone had written his name in ink, not for cleaning floors, but for building something that would never be. Swept away? The house wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, faded brick, and a creaky front step Ray kept promising to fix. But it had good bones. A garden that caught the morning sun, a kitchen that still smelled like black coffee and cinnamon toast. Liana stepped inside, carrying a stack of books and a violin case. "I still say it's temporary," she said. Dropping the bag on the couch, Ray chuckled. "You've been saying that for 3 weeks. 4, she corrected, grinning. They had fallen into a rhythm morning lessons at the school, evening tea at the table, quiet conversations in between. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't planned, but it was home. Ray walked in from the porch, wiping dirt from his hands. Tomatoes might survive this year. "I have faith in your gardening," Ileana teased, placing 2 mugs on the table. He sat across from her, sighing into the chair like it was the end of a long song. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. "Just still getting used to all this." She smiled, handing him a steaming mug. "You're allowed to have a soft landing." The evening light filtered through the curtains, painting golden streaks on the wooden floor. A faint hum from the old radio played in the background. "I always imagined growing old alone," Ray said softly. "You're not," she replied, her voice firm. "Not anymore." They clinked their mugs gently. Then, laughter light real. Unburdened in that small, imperfect house. They weren't filling a void. They were building a life, a humble one, but whole. The chairs were mismatched, some borrowed, some donated. A few squeaked when you sat down, but no one complained. The violin school was packed students, parents, neighbors, even a few reporters from that newspaper article. Today was the recital. Eliana stood at the front of the room, violin in hand, chin lifted with calm that only came from truth. Ray sat in the back row. He hadn't brought his instrument today. He wasn't playing dot today. He was listening. The students had gone first, shy fingers, crooked bows, hearts pounding. They played scales like they were sonatas, and the audience clapped like it was Carnegie Hall. Then Ileana stepped forward. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She raised the bow, met Ray's eyes for a moment, and began to play the lullaby. Mia's lullaby. It started soft, just a whisper on the strings. The same tune she once hummed, brushing her teeth. The same melody Ray had played in the shadows of that ballroom balcony. But now it filled the entire room. Strong, sure, alive, people leaned forward in their chairs. The kids sat still, eyes wide. Ray closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he let the music carry him fully to the park, to the school, to the girl in the rain when the final note faded. There was a moment of silence before applause. Thundered. Eliana bowed once, then looked at him, only him. Ray wiped his eyes, quietly, not from sadness, but because the song had finally found its ending, and it was beautiful. The office was small, tucked in the back of the city courthouse. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the scent of old paper hung in the air. Ray sat beside Ileana at the clerk's desk, hands folded. Unsure if he was supposed to be nervous, she was calm, certain. The clerka, soft certain, the clerka, soft-spoken woman with glasses sliding down her nose, flipped through the documents. "You're submitting a legal name change request," she asked. Ileana nodded. "Yes, ma'am, too." Eliana Grace Daniels. Ray's eyes widened slightly. His mouth opened, but no sound came. The clerk typed a few keys, expression unreadable. "And the reason for the change?" Ileana turned to Ray and smiled gently to carry the name of the only man who's ever made me feel like someone's daughter. Ray stared at her, speechless. The clerk looked up. "You'll be issued a certificate in a few weeks. We can expedite it if necessary." "No rush," Ileana said. "He's waited long enough." Ray finally found his voice. "You don't have to do this." "I know," she said. "That's why it means something." The clerk handed her a pen. Eliana signed without hesitation. When she stood, she reached for Ray's hand, laced her fingers through his, and held on outside the courthouse. They stepped into the afternoon sun. Ray looked at her with quiet wonder. "You're really doing this?" Ileana smiled. "No, we are." And in that moment, with no music, no audience, no fanfare, Ray didn't just gain a name on paper. He gained what he thought he'd lost forever. A daughter. Ray walked past the hotel one last time. The same marble floors. The same revolving door spinning with strangers. The same gold trim around the windows that once reflected back a man in a janitor's uniform, tired and unseen. He paused across the street. Inside, a new janitor was mopping the lobby, young, clean shirt, earbuds in. Lost in the rhythm of routine, Ray smiled. Not with envy, not with longing. Just peace. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, Mia's photo on one side, Ileana's recital program on the other. He tucked it carefully into his wallet, alongside the new ID card that read, Mia and Ileana, violin school, staff instructor. The wind picked up. He pulled his coat tighter and turned, walking toward the music shop 2 blocks down. A shipment of student violins was arriving, and he had promised to tune them by sunset as he walked. The city, HUMMED, not with noise, but with music. A boy played trumpet outside a deli. A girl hummed softly while skipping rope, and in the back of Ray's mind, strings, Mia's lullaby, Ileana's breath, the sound of one life, stitching itself into another he didn't need. Applause, or fame, or thanks. He had the violin, he had the daughter who chose him, and the road ahead. For once, it wasn't something he had to mop clean. It was something he got to walk one note, one step, one miracle at a time. He didn't look back. He didn't need to, because this time, he got to just listen.